Of all the numbers in the Bible, one has haunted the human imagination more than any other. 666, the number of the beast. It appears in the strangest and most debated book of the New Testament, the book of Revelation, in a single startling verse near its end. The text reads, "Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. For nearly 2,000 years, readers of every generation have tried to answer that same riddle. Who was this man the number pointed to? What did the number itself actually mean, and why encode it at all rather than simply naming him outright? To understand the number, we first have to understand the book it comes from, and the world in which it was written. Revelation was written, tradition holds, by the Apostle John, in exile on the small rocky island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. It was written during a time of tremendous danger for the early Christian church, a small and vulnerable movement living under the constant shadow of an empire that could crush it at will, with no warning and no appeal. Revelation is written in a style called apocalyptic literature, a genre full of coded visions, strange beasts, and symbolic numbers, meant to be understood by insiders and missed by outsiders. It was, in many ways, a form of resistance literature, written so that a hostile power reading over someone's shoulder would see only strange poetry, not a message of defiance. So when John describes the beast, he is almost certainly not describing some far-future monster. He is describing a power his first readers would immediately recognize. Most serious modern scholars agree the beast represents Roman imperial power itself, and that the number is very likely a coded reference to one specific, real, named emperor of that era. To understand how a number could hide a name, we need to understand a very old form of wordplay called Gematria. In both Hebrew and Greek, letters were also routinely used as numbers. There was no separate set of numerals in everyday use, so every single letter in the alphabet carried its own fixed numeric value. That meant every name, every word, had a hidden numeric sum, and clever writers sometimes used this to disguise a name in plain sight. When scholars apply this method to the Hebrew spelling of a name and title from John's own era, one candidate emerges again and again: Nero Caesar. Nero was the Roman emperor who ruled from the year 54 to 68, and to the early church, his name was already a byword for terror. It was Nero who, according to the ancient Roman historian Tacitus, blamed the catastrophic Great Fire that devastated much of Rome in the year 64 on the city's small Christian community. What followed, ancient sources record, was one of the very first great persecutions of the Christian faith, marked by executions carried out with theatrical, deliberately public cruelty meant to terrify the wider population. For a Christian writing in that shadow, Nero was not an abstraction. He was the beast, remembered in living memory, or in the memory of the generation just before. And here real history offers a striking piece of physical evidence for the connection between Nero and the number 666. This is a real coin, minted in the ancient world, bearing the emperor's own image and title, the very word scholars use to calculate the number. When the title's Nero Caesar is carefully transliterated into Hebrew letters and each letter's numeric value is added together in sequence, the total sum comes to exactly 666. Intriguingly, a small number of early surviving manuscripts of Revelation record a genuinely different number, 616, not 666 at all. That variant makes perfect, elegant sense under the Nero theory. A slightly different Latin-influenced spelling of his name and title, simply dropping one final Hebrew letter, produces exactly that alternate sum of 616. It is exactly the kind of small variation you would expect from a coded reference to a real name, copied and slightly altered across different regions and manuscripts. There is even a persistent ancient legend, almost certainly more folklore than historical fact, that Nero did not truly die when official Roman records claimed, but had secretly fled east and would one day return to persecute the faithful all over again. Some early Christians, living in genuine fear of exactly that, may have written and read Revelation as a warning about a returning tyrant. This is what scholars call the historicist or preterist reading: the beast is Nero, or the office of Roman emperor generally, and the number is a coded warning for its own frightened generation. But this is far from the only way the number has been read across the centuries. Scripture, once written, belongs to every generation that reads it. As the church grew and Rome itself became Christian, readers began looking elsewhere for the beast, no longer inside the empire, but among its enemies or its corruptions. Through the Middle Ages, some applied the number to whichever ruler or institution of their own day seemed most tyrannical or corrupt. During the Protestant Reformation, some reformers controversially applied the number to the papacy itself, calculating the Latin letters of a papal title to arrive, they claimed, at exactly 666. Their Catholic opponents just as readily turned the calculation back around, applying the very same method to reformist leaders of their own age. This became something of a recurring pattern throughout later history. Nearly every generation facing a feared or hated power has, at some point, tried its own hand at fitting that number onto its chosen enemy. Napoleon was calculated this way in his own time. Various modern political and religious figures have been calculated this way in ours. None of these later efforts has ever earned lasting, widespread scholarly acceptance beyond the group that proposed it. Which raises an important, humbling point. Gematria is flexible enough that with the right spelling and the right title, almost any sufficiently long name can be made to add up to something ominous. That flexibility is exactly why most careful modern scholars return to the Nero reading. It requires no invented spelling, no special pleading, just the ordinary Hebrew rendering of a real, contemporary name and title. But history and interpretation are not the only lens scholars bring to this text. Many also read it symbolically, as a statement about imperfection itself. Throughout the book of Revelation, the number 7 repeatedly represents completeness and divine perfection. 7 churches addressed directly, 7 seals broken in sequence, 7 trumpets sounded, 7 bowls poured out. 6, 1 short of 7, again and again, could then represent falling short, imperfection, incompleteness, a counterfeit of the divine that never quite arrives. Under this reading, 666 is not primarily a cipher to be cracked at all, but a kind of poetic exclamation point, failure heaped upon failure upon failure. A pretender to ultimate power, forever falling one short of the divine perfection it claims for itself. These two readings, the historical and the symbolic, are not actually in conflict. Ancient apocalyptic writers often layered real historical meaning beneath timeless symbolic truth. The number could be, at once, a coded warning about a specific, remembered tyrant, and a broader truth about every empire that ever set itself against the divine. That dual meaning may explain why the passage has resonated across so many centuries, long after Nero himself had been forgotten by most ordinary readers. So what of the mark of the beast, the phrase so often paired with the number in popular imagination? What does Scripture actually say about it? Revelation describes a system in which no ordinary person can buy or sell in the marketplace at all without bearing a mark on the hand or the forehead, a mark tied directly to public allegiance to that same beastly imperial power. Many scholars connect this passage directly to real, documented economic and social pressures faced by early Christians, who were routinely expected to publicly honor the emperor or a local pagan god just to trade freely, or to hold membership in a merchant guild at all. Refusing that public loyalty could mean exclusion from the marketplace, from a guild, from ordinary economic life itself, a very real and painful cost for an early believer. In that light, the mark is less a literal tattoo or barcode and more a powerful symbol for total, compelled allegiance to worldly power over conscience. It stands in deliberate contrast to another mark described earlier in the very same book, the seal of God placed on the foreheads of the faithful. 2 marks, 2 allegiances, one worldly and coerced, one divine and freely given. The whole passage reads, at its heart, as a call to choose between them. Over the centuries, that call has echoed far beyond its original context, resurfacing in every age of new technology and new fear. In the 20th century, as new bureaucracies grew, some believers pointed to national identification systems and commercial barcodes as possible modern fulfillments of that ancient warning. In the 21st, some have pointed to digital payment systems, microchips, or biometric identification, reading the same ancient anxiety into new technology. Serious biblical scholars generally urge real caution here. The text was written for its own specific first-century audience, addressing the exact power structures and daily pressures those first readers lived under directly and immediately. Reading every new invention as a fulfillment of ancient prophecy has, historically, an almost unbroken record of eventually being proven wrong by the passage of time. And yet the deeper principle behind the passage does not depend on identifying any specific technology at all, and may be exactly why it endures. The real, lasting question the ancient text poses is never simply what is the mark, but rather where does my ultimate loyalty truly lie, a deeply personal question every single generation must answer honestly for itself. Whether the pressure comes from an ancient emperor demanding sacrifice, or from any modern system demanding compromise, the underlying call to conscience remains exactly the same. That may well be why this single strange, unsettling number has managed to outlive the very empire that likely first inspired it, by nearly 2,000 years and counting. Nero's Rome is long gone, its palaces fallen, its legions dust. Yet the coded number some early believers may have folded into scripture to warn against him still endures. It has become something far larger than any single tyrant ever could be, a permanent, portable symbol of earthly power that overreaches its bounds, that demands for itself what rightfully belongs only to the divine. And it stands, too, as a permanent reminder that ordinary people, under real pressure, have always had to choose where their deepest loyalty truly lies. Scholars will almost certainly never reach perfect, universal agreement on every last detail of this passage. Its language was, quite deliberately, built by its author to layer meaning upon meaning rather than spell out one single plain answer. But the convergence of history, language, and coinage around one particular emperor's name remains, to many careful readers, the single most compelling thread running through the whole mystery. 666 may indeed have begun its life as a coded warning about one real, vividly remembered tyrant, hidden carefully in plain sight from hostile, watching eyes. But it has grown, across 2,000 years of readers, into something far larger than its original target, a timeless symbol of power without limit, and faith that refuses to bow to it. Every generation that reads Revelation inherits both readings at once, a specific ancient warning, and a universal, timeless question about where true allegiance belongs. In the end, perhaps that is the real, enduring purpose of the number, not merely to name one beast long since fallen, but to help every reader recognize the pattern wherever it returns.